All right. Good day, everyone. I'd like to talk about an interesting article I came across this year when I was diving into what the tribalization of people really meant and why it happens. The article I found was titled The Tribalization of America by Charles Krauthammer. It has become a prophetic work as society is degraded to a polarized state, with identity politics at the helm of public interest these days. Charles began his adult life studying psychiatry at Harvard. His contributions to the field of psychiatry led to his position on the Federal Board of Psychiatry under the Carter administration. His time in the political sphere led to an abandonment of psychiatry, claiming that he really didn't have it in him to be touchy-feely. He didn't like that, so he was glad for his time in it and what he had learned, but he began to write a conservative column for 6 publications, which earned him a Pulitzer Prize in 1987 for his accurate and witty articles, mainly including his thoughts on what came to be known as the Reagan Doctrine. I believe Charles highlighted the divisionary seeds of racial tension with his criticism of Barack Obama's racially charged acceptance speech following his first election in 2008. Here's a clip of Krauthammer's unabashed opinions about what that speech really was about and what it meant.
A speech worthy of Abraham Lincoln.
It was daring.
An extraordinary speech.
It was striking.
It's in many ways an act of honor.
The best speech ever given on race in this country.
A remarkable exploration of race from both sides of the color divide, from both sides of himself.
Well, those are pretty good reviews for Barack Obama's speech from some of our colleagues in the media. Back with our panel on this subject. Charles, we haven't heard you on this. You weren't in here yesterday. Your thoughts about the speech and the reaction to it?
The reaction is rubbish that we just saw. This speech was nothing more or less than apologia, an explaining away of Jeremiah Wright's rants, done with elegance and nuance and complexity. Essentially, it said that if you look at his remarks, this is what Obama was saying, he explained their way in 2 ways: moral equivalence and white racism. The moral equivalence is, well, at the one hand you have Jeremiah Wright, at the other hand you have Geraldine Ferraro, cited twice, and Grandma,
right,
who occasionally would utter a private epithet about a racist epithet, as if she had shouted these epithets in a crowded church or crowded theater as a way to arouse and envenom the audience, as Wright did. I mean, Obama's a guy who glories in his capacity for intellectual distinctions. There is a huge distinction between a woman of the generation of a Truman, who also uttered epithets about Jews and blacks in private, and the propagation of race hatred in a congregation on behalf of by a pastor. And the second element of that speech was extenuating and explaining it away as a reaction to white racism. He says, look, you have to put right in context. Context is history, and the history he gave is a history of racism, starting with slavery and ending at Jeremiah Wright and his anger and frustration. This kind of extenuation is what you used to hear from Jesse Jackson, except in Obama's case, dressed up in Ivy League language and Harvard Law School nuance. And that's why the commentary that we saw on this was so rhapsodic. It touched 2 erogenous zones: white guilt and intellectual flattery. And that's all it was. I think it was a brilliantly conceived failure.
Maura?
Now, whether or not it was actually a failure or not depends on maybe what you think about it. Perhaps it was designed to do exactly what we're seeing today. So now we'll move on to the article that he wrote in 1990, 30 years ago, entitled The Tribalization of America, written August 6, 1990, 30 years ago. So it goes on to say, one day's news: a prominent Tory MP is killed by an IRA car bomb. Government soldiers in Liberia murder hundreds of refugees from a rival rebel tribe. A radical Islamic sect in Trinidad kidnaps the Prime Minister and his cabinet and holds them at gunpoint. American Indians demonstrate outside the Canadian Embassy in solidarity with Mohawks caught in a violent land dispute with Quebec, which itself is in an autonomy dispute with Canada. It still is. What connects these unconnected events? The powerful, often ignored global reality of tribalism. The Irish, Liberian, and Trinidadian variety is more violent, but Canada illustrates best its bewilderingly regressive nature. Canadian nationalism has long sought to distinguish itself from the United States, Quebec nationalism to distinguish itself from Canada, and now here come the Mohawks with their own claim of apartness from Quebec. Tribes within nations within empires. The world is littered with such Chinese boxes. Now, Chinese boxes are boxes that fit inside of each other, small to large, so that's his description of nations within empires, stacked on top of each other. And they make perfect tinder for conflict. Do they ever? Nowhere more so than in the Soviet bloc, where the decline of communism has brought a rival of tribalism, most notably in Azerbaijan and Transylvania, which is as savage and primitive as seen anywhere. What is all this to Americans? A lesson and a warning. America alone among its multi-ethnic countries of the world has managed to assimilate its citizenry into a common nationality. We are now doing our best to squander this great achievement. Spain still has its Basque secessionists, France its Corsicans. Even Britain has the pull of Scottish and Welsh, to say nothing of Irish nationalists. But America has, through painful experience, found a way to overcome its centrifugal forces. American unity has been built on a tightly federalist politics and a powerful melting pot culture. Most important, America chose to deal with the problem of differentness by embracing a radical individualism and rejecting the notion of group rights. Of course, there was one great shameful historical exception, the denial of rights to blacks. When that was finally outlawed in the 1960s, which was the removal of the Jim Crow laws and redlining laws, which were both democratic policies that they fought virulently for, America appeared ready to resume its destiny, a destiny celebrated by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. as the home of a true and now universal individualism. The rights of the individual come before the rights of the group. That is the foundation of freedom that everyone is throwing away today with identity politics. Why is this a destiny to be celebrated? Because it works. Because while Spain and Canada, to say nothing of Liberia and Ireland, are racked by separatism and tribal conflict, America has been largely spared. Its union is now more secure than that of any multi-ethnic nation on earth. We are now, however, in the process of throwing away this patrimony. Our great national achievement, fashioning a common citizenship and identity for a multi-ethnic, multilingual, multiracial people, is now being threatened by a process of relentless, deliberate balkanization. The great engines of social life, the law, the schools, the arts, are systematically encouraging the division of America into racial, ethnic, and gender separateness. So this becomes perhaps the real place where you could quote-unquote call the system systemically racist, where the laws, the schools, and the arts have begun a process 30 years ago of starting to divide people into their selective groups, where they stand on those groups and believe those groups are the only way to their rights and freedoms, and it's caused nothing but chaos. So this is something that has possibly happened due to an infiltration. If it's not an infiltration, then it is just pure ignorance of understanding what will happen in the future when you begin to establish a society like this. It began with the courts, which legitimized the allocation of jobs, government contracts, admission to medical school, and now TV licenses by race, gender, and ethnic group. This is the primary thing that should always be avoided. Why should there be a channel dedicated to any group identity? It does nothing but bolster that your identity as a group means more than the identity as an individual, which is nothing but communism. Then education. First, Stanford capitulated to separatist know-nothings and abandoned its Western civilization course because of its bias towards white males. You know, narrow-minded ethnics like Socrates, Jesus, and Thomas Jefferson. Now the push is to start kids much earlier on in the road to intellectual separatism. Grade school, for example. So people think that it's new in the news a lot today, thinking that the government has been using the earliest level of education to begin molding your child's thoughts and their view of the world. It's been going on for far longer than we think. A proposed revision of New York State school curriculum to rid it of Eurocentric bias is so clearly an attempt at ethnic cheerleading on the demand of pressure groups that historians Diane Ravitch, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., C. Van Woodward, Robert Caro, and 20 others were moved to issue a joint protest. Despite their considerable ideological differences, they nonetheless joined to oppose the, quote, use of the school system to promote the division of our people into antagonistic racial groups. So even back in the day, 30 years ago, there was groups of scholars, historians who were in vehement protest of this, and nonetheless it trampled on right up to where we are today with riots in the streets and virtual race war on our heels. Even the arts have been conscripted into the separatist crusade. Both the Rockefeller and Ford Foundations, writes Samuel Lippman in commentary, intend to downgrade and even eliminate support for art based on traditional European sources, and instead will encourage activity by certain approved minorities, which is the elimination of equality. If we are all going to be celebrated as equals, you can't get rid of anything. We all need to celebrate each other, and that's what's not happening today, and I believe it's possibly happening on purpose. Countries struggling to transcend their tribal separateness have long looked to America as their model. Fact. Even Ho Chi Minh tried to get America to come help him with his problems in Vietnam, but after being unfortunately ignored, someone was just shelving his requests in a file cabinet somewhere, never to be seen by the president, he eventually turned to communism. Isn't it interesting to note that we could have avoided the Vietnam War had Ho Chi Minh been answered by the American government and perhaps helped with their struggle for independence? In fact, Cuba, Guantanamo Bay was won by Theodore Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. They went on to aid Cubans at their behest to free them from the oligarch that was ruling over them. That is why to this day, even though Cuba and the United States of America are at odds, America still maintains a little piece of Cuba known as Guantanamo Bay. Basically the offshore prison where, interrogations and such happen. So at any rate, continuing on. Countries struggling to transcend their tribal separateness have long looked to America as their model. Now, however, America is going backward. While the great multi-ethnic states try desperately to imbue their people with a sense of shared national identity, the great American institutions, from the courts to the foundations, are promoting group identity instead. This is why I tend to believe it's being done on purpose. Now, what is the intent of this game that they're playing? Is it following into the Hegelian dialectic of problem-solution or problem-reaction-solution? They'll create the problem of racial indifference. The reaction will be what we're seeing today. The solution will be, I don't know, will it be to allow everyone to fight themselves to a place of exhaustion and then to offer a solution that will unite everyone once again? I think that has to be the solution, but what it's going to look like is going to be a surprise. Moving on. Without ever having thought it through, we are engaged in unmaking the American Union and encouraging the very tribalism that is the bane of the modern world. And indeed, tribalism has been the bane of human history, not just the modern world. The more groups that were in existence with different languages, cultures, religions, colors of people, all these things that could be separated were the cause of all the conflicts through history, and to this day still are. I say that most conflict today is actually being driven by ancient religious, ancient religious manifestation of tribal groups that hold on to their religion to this day and are at conflict with each other to this day. So the Dome of the Rock is kind of what I think most of the wars in the world are being fought in and around. So again, as I've said, is the purpose to push everyone to a place of exhaustion to the point where they're just sick of fighting anymore? And what is the answer? And then when everyone is pushed to that place, will they finally be offered the answer that they will accept? Or is this simply the non-stop wash, rinse, repeat of keeping everyone separate, the whole divide and conquer thing, and it will just continue to roll on like this infinitum and nothing will ever get solved? I guess we'll have to see. It's going to be an interesting century for everyone who lives long enough to see what's going to unfold this over the next 50 years. I'm interested to see myself. As scary as it is, it's hard to take your eyes off of. So that is the interesting prophetic work done by Charles Krauthammer 30 years ago, his criticism of Obama, possibly the introduction of the racial division that we've seen today, seeded by Obama during his speech. And I'll leave you with some notable quotes from Charles Krauthammer. He passed away 2 years ago, and I feel the world is at a loss for him not being here anymore. He had no problem criticizing both Trump, Hillary, Bill Clinton, Obama. He was able to criticize them based on his psychiatric ability to understand people and where they were going with things. And he remained based as being a constitutionalist. He firmly believed in the Constitution. So anyway, this is just to celebrate him a little bit, some of his notable quotes that he's made through time and how accurate that they were. So we'll finish with that.
Wow. Let me give a piece of advice. When there's a suit between the Leviathan state of Obama against the little sisters of the poor, take the side of the little sisters of the poor. I have a soft spot. It could be because I was in my youth a liberal. Yes. I retain the marshmallow deep inside my heart. The pity is this. This is the strongest field of Republican candidates. And instead, all our time is spent discussing this rodeo clown. I'm the best president I've ever been. It's a pretty low bar. This is what it sounds like when you're living in a banana republic. Every time liberals lose, they accuse the other side of all kinds of isms. The world is going to hell in a handbasket. It'll snow in hell before the DOJ is going to go after her. Hide Sean Spicer, witness protection program, somewhere in Iowa, I think would help, and take away the president's tweeting machine. Loser by far, Melissa McCarthy. She lost Old Spicy, and she will miss him. She didn't just lose a guy. She killed him.
You officially are putting a black chip now on Donald Trump in Canada Casino.
I put the $100 on Monday this week, and I left at $10 so I can get really drunk.
You've been through Wine, Women, and Song, opioids.
I seem to have started a trend. The only other option is an act of God, and he appears to be otherwise occupied right now.
All right. Thanks for watching. Peace out.